Hey, I want to take some time today to address a study I was reading this morning. Now, since I read this morning, I've actually had a few people sending me emails saying, have you seen this study? What do you think of it? And I'm not sure why people care what I think of it. I think it's mainly because I'm the only gun channel that doesn't shy away from these type of things. It seems like too many of the larger gun channels, 250,000 subscribers and more, they don't want to say anything that might be at least a bit controversial because they might lose a sub and make a quarter less that month. I don't know. I understand why some places people run their channels like a business, and I'm okay with that, but I think that's why people come to me, because they know this is not a business. This is just some nut job in his garage. Well, I used to say garage. It's actually a studio now. It's not my garage anymore. But, that's why people ask me. It's not because I'm extremely smart or anything like that, or eloquent, because I'm not eloquent. It's just because I'm willing to talk. So I wanted to address this study. Now you might be saying, well, what study is it? Well, it's a study that was put out recently that says semi-automatic rifles kill twice as many people as other types of weapons when semi-automatic rifles are used. And it's what it's trying to do. The whole point of the study is to make people think semi-automatic weapons kill twice as many people in this country, which nothing could be further from the truth. This is a situation where people have used very selective information, very narrow swath of actual statistics to try to prove a preconceived point. And what they're trying to justify here is the left's attack on semi-automatic rifles. Why they go after semi-automatic rifles so heavily. Because we all know that they demonize ARs like crazy, even though they're used in such a tiny percentage of fatal shootings in this country. Such a tiny percentage. So most people, when they look at that, they're like, well, why are you worried about these? Why don't you worry about the bigger problem in general? Well, people on the left, the anti-gunners, they don't want to worry about the general problem. They just want to disarm pro-gun people. They want to take away their semi-automatic rifles. That's their main goal, to get rid of semi-automatic rifles. And you might say, why? Well, ask yourself this. If there ever came need for militias in this country to rise up, what would they use? Well, it wouldn't be handguns and shotguns. It'd be semi-automatic rifles. So if you take away semi-automatic rifles, the elites have less to worry about. But let's get back onto the study here. Basically what this study says is if you look at all killings, well, you can't justify hating ARs because they're such a tiny little percentage. But if you narrow it down to this tiny little swath here, if you just say active shooter situations. And active shooter situations basically leaves out every type of killing other than terrorist attacks and like hostage type situations. So that's what you're dealing with basically when you go look at active shooter situations. These are situations where usually people intended to go somewhere and kill a lot of people. So if you narrow it down to instances where someone intended to go somewhere and kill a lot of people, semi-automatic rifles are twice as deadly, they're saying. And that kind of makes sense to most people. Most people would say, yeah, during a terrorist attack, they're probably going to use semi-automatic rifles, or during a hostage attack, they're probably going to take the proper tools if they're going somewhere intentionally to kill someone. So what's your point? Well, they have to make it seem like it's more dangerous and more common than it is. That's why they put the headline of semi-automatic rifles kill twice as many people, because they want to mislead people into thinking it's overall when it's not. It's just this tiny little segment. And I've used this example before in the past. You can use a tiny little segment of data to promote any point. You could say, there's more infant death in America than Africa. If your criteria is, we don't count deaths from malaria or cholera or starvation or murder. We only count deaths of children who died because they had a faulty crib from Sears. Well, of course, more parents are going to have children die because of a faulty crib from Sears. I'm not saying Sears is killing children. Than America than in Africa, because they don't buy cribs at Sears in Africa. So they've created a situation where they can prove a false point or make something seem true that isn't by saying that more kids die in America, more infant mortality. And that's what they did in this study. Because like I said, they narrowed it down to active shooters. But even then, when they narrowed it down to this tiny little swath, and let's say active shooter situations are 5%, that's pretty generous. Let's say it's 5%. So you're thinking, okay, well, 5% of the time, ARs are used, or semi-automatic rifles. No, because even in that 5% of active shooter situations, only 1 in 4 use the semi-automatic rifle. 1 in 4. Even when you narrow it down to that tiny criteria there. That means 25% of 5%. That's 1.25%. That number ain't scary, so they can't use that number. So they have to make it seem like rifles are killing twice as many people. So they use some very creative terminology through this list. And you might say, well, how can anyone get a study published that is using such narrow criteria and such biased opinions? Well, I don't know how they could get it published. The person who's responsible for this study, the lead researcher on this publication, is a woman named Elziri DeJager. I hope I'm saying it right. It's ELZERIE space JAGER. And she is a PhD scholar. She's a PhD student at an Australian university. And she works in a women's hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. In fact, the other 2 doctors listed on her study are also doctors at this women's hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. And you might say, well, how did they get this study published when it's obviously so riddled with inaccuracies and falsehoods and biases? Well, I don't know how they managed to get that published. I don't know who could fund that or cause that to happen. Bloomberg. Excuse me. But they got it published. And okay, let's actually deal with their study here. And let's talk about one problem with their study right off the bat. It doesn't take intent. It doesn't take intent into account at all. Because if someone is going to a place, a crowded place, a confined place, with an automatic rifle, they're intent on killing a lot of people. Most people who kill someone with a firearm aren't intent on killing a lot of people. They're intent on killing one very specific person, sometimes 2 or 3. Like cheating wife's boyfriend, or mom and dad or whatever in their home or at their workplace. Not going to just rack up numbers. People that are going to rack up numbers tend to choose an AR or another type of semi-automatic rifle, AK, etc. So right there off the bat, since they fail to take intent into account, and that's probably because this person doesn't stay as a social worker, not a criminologist or anyone that has any expertise in the field of crime, they don't understand how you have to take intent into account. Motive is very big in these type of studies. They completely ignore that. They forget to say, well, yeah, but that 1 in 4 people is probably someone who intentionally meant to kill more people, whereas the other 3 out of the 4 didn't intend to kill more people. So the number is skewed from the bat because you forget to take attention into account. If you could say, if you looked at situations where someone went intentionally to kill a lot of people and one had an AR and one had a shotgun and the person with the AR was more successful, that would be more conclusive, but they can't do that. They can't be that specific or they ruin their whole basis of their study right off the bat. So they have to just narrow it down to active shooters and say 1 out of 4 uses and blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying here. But here's the thing. Even when they get down to that 1 in 4, like I said, they didn't take into account intent. You're basically looking at just comparing apples to oranges here because you're comparing terrorists to people who actually just kill someone, which makes up the mass amount of the shootings. So here's what they ended up saying. They said, well, the person, that 1 in 4 that uses a semi-automatic rifle kills an average of 6 people, whereas the other 3 don't. Now you're saying, well, I guess that means the other 3 kill an average of 3 people, right? No, it doesn't even mean that. Because here's the creative terminology they use towards the end of their study. They start off dealing with semi-automatic rifles, but towards the end they start saying semi-automatic weapons versus non-semi-automatic weapons. And their conclusion is that when someone uses a semi-automatic weapon versus someone who uses a non-semi-automatic weapon, in these 5% of cases, the 1 out of 5%, so 1.25%, there's more people killed with the semi-automatic rifle. Now that doesn't mean that someone if you look at the other 3, let's say you look at the one that used the semi-automatic rifle, and I'm getting confusing here because I'm confusing myself, but if you look at the one person that used a semi-automatic rifle and they kill 6 people, well then you would think, well, you look at all these other 3, they each killed 3. No, this one could have killed 6, this one could have killed 8 if they used a semi-automatic weapon that wasn't a rifle. It's the one that used a revolver or a shotgun that only killed 3 on average. And they ignore these 2 and compare this one to this one. the guy who used the revolver, which makes it an even more skewed statistic, because no one who has intent to kill a lot of people is going to walk into a mall with a 5-shot revolver to do it. That's a defensive weapon, not an offensive weapon. So they're basically saying people who take offensive weapons with the intent of killing a lot of people are more successful than people who show up without the right tools, or people who show up with just the defensive firearm. Well, that's common sense, and it doesn't demonize ARs. So this whole study is just flawed from top to bottom, misleading from top to bottom. And like I said, how'd they get it published? Bloomberg. That wasn't as discreet that time, was it? But it's just garbage. It's a garbage study meant to promote this whole idea that they're right to go after ARs, because the left has got a hard-on for ARs. The anti-gunners have a hard-on for ARs. And it's because, like I said, they want to disarm the citizens, the non-elite. And they find more and more of these do-gooders that they can misuse to do that every day. So I don't know what they were thinking when they did this study. If you want to know, I guess you could contact this Elzarie Jaeger person. I know she's got a Twitter. It's Elzarie DJ, just like I spelled her first name earlier with just DJ at Twitter. So maybe you could ask her. Don't harass her. Just say, what was the point of the study, and why did you not do this and why did you not do that? Because I'd love to know why they based their study the way they did. It seems very clear that this was just an attempt to justify an attack on semi-automatic rifles. So it makes no sense. This whole thing is stupid. It's just basically a Bloomberg's promotion to say, here's why we're going after ARs. It's not because we want to disarm the populace so they can never rise up against the elite. It's because they're so deadly, even though they're only used in 1.25%, and these numbers aren't exact. I'm using these for examples. Even though they're only used in a tiny percent of shootings, and in that tiny percent of shootings they're used in, they're twice as deadly as this other little tiny percent of shootings where someone uses like a revolver or something. That's garbage. It's just all garbage from the beginning. Why would you even publish a study like that? It makes no sense. So ask her why she did the study. But as far as the study itself, it's garbage. It's only there for one thing and one thing only, and it is to justify and defend an indefensible position that the anti-gunners have taken, that ARs are the problem and they have to be out of the hands of citizens. And all I can say at the end is, yeah, you have a reason why you think they need to be out of the hands of citizens, but it's not the reasons you say.